A Werewolf Shifter Romance by Lena, from Lena's Romance Library. Chapter 1. When Promises Shatter. The ivory silk of Alara's wedding dress rustled against the marble floor as she pressed her ear to the heavy oak door of the vestibule. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat echoing the terrible words she'd just overheard. "You can't be serious, Marcus. Not today of all days." "I've never been more serious in my life, Father. I won't marry her. I can't." The deep baritone that had once whispered sweet promises in her ear now carried nothing but cold resolve. Alara's breath caught in her throat, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching the antique doorknob until her knuckles turned white. "The contracts are signed," came the stern voice of Marcus's father, Senator Blackwood. "The merger depends on this union. Your mother's medical bills. Find another way." Marcus's footsteps paced across the room beyond. "I won't trap myself in a loveless marriage just to save face. Alara deserves better than a husband who can barely stand to touch her." The words hit Alara like physical blows, each syllable carved deeper into her chest, stealing the breath from her lungs. She stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the train of her grandmother's vintage dress. The same dress 3 generations of Thornfield women had worn on their wedding days. Can barely stand to touch her. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, tasting the metallic tang of blood where her teeth had bitten down too hard on her lower lip. Through the stained glass windows of St. Catherine's Cathedral, late afternoon sunlight cast rainbow fragments across her pale skin, making her look ethereal and broken all at once. Alara? Her maid of honor, Sophie, appeared in the doorway, her emerald bridesmaid dress a stark contrast to her worried expression. "The ceremony is supposed to start in 10 minutes. Where's Marcus?" Alara couldn't speak, couldn't form the words that would shatter not just her own world, but the carefully constructed facade her family had built around this union. The Thornfield name carried weight in Boston's elite circles, but it also carried debt. Crushing, soul-destroying debt that only Marcus Blackwood's family fortune could erase. Her father had made that abundantly clear 6 months ago when he'd announced the engagement at their annual charity gala. "A perfect match," he'd declared, raising his champagne flute while cameras flashed. Young love blooming into a powerful alliance. Young love. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her now. "Alara, you're scaring me." Sophie moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," Alara managed, her voice barely audible. "Maybe I've been living as one this whole time." Before Sophie could respond, the vestibule door burst open. Marcus stood there, his black hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. His dark eyes, the ones she'd once thought held such depth and passion, now looked at her with something that made her stomach turn. Pity. "Alara." He stepped forward, his hands outstretched as if approaching a wounded animal. "We need to talk." "No." The word came out stronger than she felt. "We don't." She had heard enough. More than enough. The cathedral bells began to toll, their bronze voices announcing to the 150 guests that something was terribly wrong. Murmurs rippled through the sanctuary as minutes ticked by without a processional. Marcus's jaw tightened. Even now, even as he prepared to destroy her in front of everyone they knew, he was beautiful. Tall and broad-shouldered in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, with the kind of classical features that belonged on magazine covers. She had loved that face once, traced every angle of it with reverent fingers, believing in the promises that fell from those perfectly sculpted lips. "I can't do this," he said, confirming what she already knew. "I won't trap us both in a marriage based on nothing but convenience and obligation." "Convenience?" Alara's voice cracked on the word. "Is that what you call the last year of my life? Convenient?" guilt flashed across his features, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "You know what I mean?" "No, Marcus, I don't think I do." She straightened her spine, drawing on some reserve of strength she didn't know she possessed. "Why don't you explain it to me? Better yet, why don't you explain it to the congregation? To my parents? To the press who are undoubtedly gathering outside right now?" His face went pale. "Alara, please, don't make this harder than it has to be." "Harder than it has to be?" She laughed, the sound sharp and brittle in the sacred space. "You're leaving me at the altar, and you're worried about making things harder?" Sophie stepped between them, her protective instincts flaring. "Marcus, what the hell is wrong with you?" But Alara was already moving, pushing past both of them toward the side door that led to the cathedral's gardens. She couldn't face the crowd, couldn't bear to see the mixture of scandal-hungry excitement and genuine sympathy that would be painted across their guests' faces. "Alara, wait!" Marcus called after her, but she didn't stop. The garden door slammed behind her with satisfying finality. Cool October air hit her overheated skin like a blessing, carrying the scent of dying leaves and the promise of winter's approach. Her breath came in sharp puffs in the crisp air as she gathered up the layers of silk and tulle, hiking her dress high enough to run. And run she did. Past the perfectly manicured rose beds, past the marble cherubs that had watched over countless wedding photos, past the wrought iron gates that separated the cathedral grounds from Boston's bustling streets. Her veil caught on a tree branch and tore free, floating behind her like a ghostly banner of surrender. She didn't stop running until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, finally collapsing onto a park bench beside the Charles River. The water moved in dark, restless currents that matched the turmoil in her chest. Families of ducks glided by, oblivious to the human drama playing out on the shore. Her phone buzzed incessantly in the small clutch Sophie had insisted she carry. Text after text, call after call. She pulled it out with shaking fingers, seeing her mother's name flashing on the screen. "Darling, where are you? The guests are asking questions. Come back. We can fix this. Fix this." As if her shattered heart was nothing more than a broken vase that could be glued back together and displayed on a shelf, the cracks hidden from casual observation. She turned off the phone and let it fall into her lap, staring out at the water as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Somewhere behind her, the life she had carefully constructed was crumbling into dust. The wedding that was supposed to launch her into Boston's highest social tier. The marriage that would save her family from financial ruin. The future she had convinced herself she wanted. All of it gone. A strange sound caught her attention. A low, mournful howl that seemed to come from the wooded area across the river. It raised the hair on her arms and sent an inexplicable shiver down her spine. She had lived in Boston her entire life, but she had never heard anything quite like that before. As the last light faded from the sky, Alara Thornfield sat alone in her wedding dress, surrounded by the pieces of her broken dreams, and wondered if she had ever truly been alive at all, or if she had always been just another beautiful doll in her family's collection, waiting for someone else to decide her fate. The howl came again, closer this time, and something deep in her chest responded with a longing she didn't understand. Chapter 2. The Stranger in the Storm. The first drops of rain began to fall as darkness settled over the Charles River like a heavy blanket. Alara pulled her grandmother's lace shawl tighter around her shoulders, but the delicate fabric offered little protection against the October chill. She should go home, should face the wreckage of her wedding day, and begin the impossible task of explaining to 200 guests why the bride had vanished into the night. But she couldn't move. Not yet. The park had emptied as the temperature dropped, leaving her alone with the rustling trees and the increasingly aggressive wind that whipped her dark hair across her face. Street lamps flickered on along the walking path, casting pools of amber light that only made the shadows between them seem deeper. Another howl echoed across the water, and this time Alara was certain it hadn't come from any dog. The sound was too wild, too primal, carrying notes of grief and rage that resonated somewhere deep in her bones. She found herself standing, drawn toward the edge of the river, despite every rational thought screaming at her to head back to civilization. You shouldn't be out here alone. The voice came from behind her, deep and rough like whiskey over gravel. Alara spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. A man emerged from the shadows between two oak trees, moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost predatory. Even in the dim light, she could see he was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out a black leather jacket. Dark hair fell in waves to his collar, framing a face that was all sharp angles and dangerous beauty. "I'm fine," she said, taking an instinctive step backward. Her heel caught on a loose stone, and she stumbled. He moved faster than should have been possible, covering the distance between them in what seemed like a single stride. Strong hands caught her arms, steadying her before she could fall. The moment his skin touched hers, a shock of electricity ran up her arms. Not the gentle spark of attraction she'd occasionally felt with Marcus, but something raw and overwhelming that made her gasp. His grip tightened for just a moment, his eyes widening as if he'd felt it too. "Careful." His voice was quieter now, but no less intense. In the lamplight, she could see his eyes were an unusual shade of amber, almost gold, and they seemed to glow with their own inner light. "The path is uneven here." "Thank you." She tried to step back, but he didn't immediately release her. They stood frozen like that, his hands warm through the silk of her sleeves, while the rain began to fall in earnest. I should go." "Should you?" He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're running from something. Or someone." It wasn't a question. Somehow, this stranger could read her pain as easily as if it were written across her forehead. "I don't know what you mean." A small, knowing smile curved his lips. "The wedding dress was my first clue." Heat flooded her cheeks. She had forgotten for a moment that she was still wearing the elaborate gown, still playing the part of the abandoned bride, complete with smeared makeup and a torn veil that probably lay somewhere on the cathedral grounds by now. "It's complicated," she managed. "The best stories usually are." He finally released her arms, but didn't step back. Rain was beginning to soak through his jacket, darkening the leather, but he didn't seem to notice. "I'm Kale." "Alara." The name slipped out before she could think better of it. Something about this man made her want to trust him, despite every lesson her privileged upbringing had taught her about talking to strangers. "Ilara." He repeated her name like he was tasting it, rolling it around on his tongue. Beautiful name for a beautiful woman. She should have felt flattered, should have blushed and stammered like she had with Marcus in the early days of their courtship. Instead, she felt something deeper stirring in her chest. Something that whispered this man was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical harm. "You're not from Boston," she said, trying to regain her composure. His accent held traces of something else, something wilder than the refined New England tones she was used to. "Number I'm just passing through." Lightning flickered in the distance, followed by a low rumble of thunder. "Storm's getting worse. Let me walk you somewhere safe." "I don't need—" "Everyone needs somewhere safe, Alara." The way he said her name sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Especially someone who's been hurt as badly as you have. The observation hit too close to home. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed in ways that went far beyond her rain-soaked dress. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you're in pain. I know someone broke something precious, and you're trying to hold the pieces together with nothing but pride and stubbornness." He took a step closer, and she caught a scent that seemed to belong more to the deep woods than the city. Pine and earth and something indefinably wild. "I know you don't want to go home, because home means facing questions you're not ready to answer." Tears she'd been holding back all evening finally spilled over, mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "Stop. I know what it's like to have your world shatter in a single moment," he continued, his voice gentle now. "To realize that everything you thought you knew about your life was built on lies. Please." The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Kyle reached up, and for a moment she thought he was going to touch her face. Instead, he shrugged out of his leather jacket and settled it around her shoulders. The garment was warm from his body heat and far too large for her frame, but it felt like armor against the storm. "There's a diner about 6 blocks from here," he said. "Coffee, pie, and no one who'll ask questions about why a woman in a wedding dress is wandering around in the rain at 10 o'clock at night." She knew she should say no, should thank him politely and call a cab to take her back to Beacon Hill, where her parents were probably pacing the floors and her phone was filled with increasingly frantic messages. But the thought of facing all of that, the disappointment, the financial implications, the social scandal, made her stomach clench with dread. "I don't have any money," she admitted. "My purse is back at the church. My treat." He gestured toward the path that led back to the street. "Consider it payment for the company of someone who understands what it means to lose everything in a single night." Another rumble of thunder, closer this time. The rain was coming down harder now, turning from a gentle shower into something that threatened to soak them both to the bone. Alara pulled her jacket tighter around herself, breathing in that strange, intoxicating scent that seemed to calm something restless in her soul. "Okay," she said finally, "but just coffee, and then I really do need to get home." Kyle's smile was brilliant in the lamplight, transforming his severe features into something that stole her breath. "Just coffee," he agreed. As they walked toward the street together, Alara caught herself glancing sideways at her unexpected savior. There was something about the way he moved, something about the careful distance he maintained between them, that suggested he was holding himself back, restraining some part of his nature that wanted to be closer. She told herself it was her imagination, brought on by shock and heartbreak and the surreal nature of the entire evening. But deep down, some primitive part of her brain whispered that Cale was exactly what he appeared to be. Beautiful, dangerous, and absolutely nothing like any man she had ever met. The howling came one more time as they reached the sidewalk, and this time, Cale went completely still beside her, his head turning toward the sound with predatory focus. "What was that?" she asked. When he looked back at her, his amber eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said softly. "Not while you're with me." Chapter 3. Sanctuary in the Storm. The Midnight Diner lived up to its name, a narrow slice of warmth and light squeezed between a used bookstore and a vintage clothing shop on a side street that most of Boston's elite would never venture down. Neon signs buzzed in the rain-streaked windows, advertising coffee that was always fresh and pie that was made daily. The kind of place where the waitresses called everyone honey and nobody asked too many questions. Alara hesitated at the door, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her wedding dress, though made of the finest silk and hand-sewn with seed pearls, was now a sodden mess that clung to her body in all the wrong ways. Her carefully styled hair hung in dark waves around her face, and she was certain her makeup had long since been washed away by tears and rain. "Second thoughts?" Kyle asked softly. He stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, but not so close as to make her feel trapped. Everything about him seemed carefully controlled, as if he was constantly monitoring his own reactions. "I look like a drowned bride," she admitted, pulling his leather jacket tighter around her shoulders. The scent of him, wild and woodsy and completely masculine, was starting to become addictive. "You look like a woman who's survived something terrible and is still standing." His amber eyes met hers in the reflection of the window. "That's not something to be ashamed of." The simple kindness in his voice almost undid her completely. When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen strength instead of weakness? Marcus had always made her feel like a delicate flower that needed constant protection, a beautiful ornament to display at social functions. But Cale spoke to her like she was made of steel instead of glass. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and the warmth hit Alara like a physical embrace. The diner was nearly empty, just a truck driver hunched over coffee at the counter, and an elderly couple sharing a piece of apple pie in a corner booth. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, looked up from wiping down tables. "Well now, what have we got here?" she asked, taking in Alara's appearance without a trace of judgment. "Honey, you look like you could use some coffee and maybe a warm blanket." "Coffee would be perfect," Alara managed, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. The waitress, her name tag read Betty, led them to a booth in the back, away from the windows and the curious glances of the other patrons. She returned moments later with 2 steaming mugs and a plate of fresh chocolate chip cookies. "On the house," she said with a wink, before disappearing back behind the counter. Alara wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, letting the heat seep into her chilled fingers. Across from her, Cale seemed to fill the entire booth with his presence, though he sat with careful stillness. She noticed he barely touched his coffee, instead watching her with that unsettling intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through to her soul. "So," she said, desperate to break the silence that was stretching between them. "What brings you to Boston?" "Business?" Something flickered across his features, too quick to identify, but dark enough to make her stomach tighten. Something like that. "Very mysterious." She took a sip of her coffee, wincing slightly at the bitter taste. It was strong enough to wake the dead, but warmth was spreading through her chest for the first time all evening. "Let me guess. You're in town for a corporate takeover. Or maybe you're a private investigator tracking down a cheating spouse." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Nothing quite so mundane." "Then what?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "I'm looking for someone who was taken from my family. Someone very important to me." The pain in those words was unmistakable, and Alara felt her heart clench in sympathy. "I'm sorry. That must be terrifying." "It is." He lifted his coffee cup but set it down without drinking, his fingers drumming silently against the table. "She's been missing for 3 weeks now. The trail led here, but you haven't found her." "No." His jaw clenched, and for a moment, something almost feral flashed in his amber eyes. The people who took her are very good at covering their tracks. There was something in the way he said "people" that made Alara's skin prickle, as if the word didn't quite fit what he really meant. "Have you gone to the police?" His laugh was bitter. The police wouldn't understand the kind of danger she's in. They wouldn't know how to find her, and they definitely wouldn't know how to keep her safe once they did. "But you would." "Yes." The certainty in his voice was absolute, predatory. "I would." Alara studied his face, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands had curled into fists on the table. Whatever had happened to this missing person, Kyle blamed himself. The guilt and rage were written in every line of his body, carefully contained but still visible to someone who understood what it felt like to have your world torn apart. "What's her name?" she asked softly. Luna. His expression softened for just a moment. She's my sister. My only family. I'm sure you'll find her. The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. You don't seem like the type to give up easily. No, he agreed. I'm not. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the lights in the diner flickered. Through the rain-streaked windows, Elara could see the storm was getting worse. Trees bent under the force of the wind, and debris skittered across the empty street. Looks like we're stuck here for a while, Betty called from behind the counter. This storm's supposed to last most of the night. Alara's heart sank. She needed to get home, needed to face whatever disaster awaited her there. But the thought of calling her parents, of explaining why she'd run away in front of half of Boston society, made her stomach turn. You're thinking too loud, Cale observed. I'm sorry? Whatever's going through your head right now, you're broadcasting it like a neon sign. He leaned forward slightly, those unusual eyes never leaving her face. You're scared to go home. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. My parents are probably frantic. The wedding was supposed to be the social event of the season. 200 guests, 5-course dinner, reception at the Four Seasons. She laughed humorlessly. Instead, they got a runaway bride and a scandal that'll be front-page news in the society pages tomorrow. Let them talk, Cale said with quiet intensity. People who judge you for refusing to trap yourself in a loveless marriage aren't worth your concern. Easy for you to say. Your family's financial future doesn't depend on maintaining social connections and business relationships. You're right, he admitted. My family's survival depends on much more primitive things. Loyalty, strength, the willingness to protect what's yours, no matter the cost. There was something almost ritualistic about the way he spoke, as if he was reciting words that held deeper meaning than their surface suggested. Elara found herself leaning forward, drawn by the conviction in his voice. That sounds like a hard way to live. It can be. His eyes met hers across the table. But it's honest. No pretense, no games, no pretty lies wrapped up in silk and presented as love. The words hit their mark with surgical precision. Marcus had been all pretty lies and careful manipulation, hadn't he? Telling her what she wanted to hear while secretly resenting every moment they spent together. How do you know so much about pretty lies? She asked. Cale's smile was sharp enough to cut. Because I used to be very good at telling them. Before she could ask what that meant, a sound cut through the night that made every hair on her body stand on end. It wasn't thunder or wind, but something that seemed to come from the very depths of the storm itself. A howl of rage and hunger that spoke to something primitive buried deep in her DNA. Cale went completely still, his head tilted as if he was listening to something she couldn't hear. When he looked at her again, his eyes held a wildness that hadn't been there moments before. Elara, he said quietly, I need you to stay exactly where you are, no matter what happens. Can you do that for me? Chapter 4. When darkness calls. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees in the span of a heartbeat. Elara watched, transfixed, as Cale's entire demeanor shifted from controlled calm to something that reminded her of a predator scenting danger on the wind. His amber eyes had gone completely still, and the careful mask he'd been wearing all evening finally slipped. Cale? She whispered, her fingers tightening around her coffee mug. What's wrong? He held up one hand, signaling for silence, his head cocked at an angle that seemed almost inhuman. Whatever he was listening for, it was something her ears couldn't detect. The only sounds she could hear were the steady drumming of rain against the windows and the soft jazz playing from the diner's ancient radio. But then it came again, that bone-deep howl that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the building. This time it was answered by another voice, and then another, until the night air filled with a chorus of sounds that had no business existing in the middle of Boston. Betty dropped a plate behind the counter, the ceramic shattering against the floor with a crash that made everyone in the diner jump. "What in the Sam Hill was that?" she muttered, moving toward the front windows with obvious reluctance. "Don't." Kyle's voice cut through the space like a blade. The waitress froze mid-step, something in his tone making her instinctively obey. "Stay away from the windows." "Now listen here, mister." Her protest died as the lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on, bathing everything in an eerie red glow that made shadows dance across the walls like living things. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched Cale rise from the booth with fluid grace, his movements controlled and purposeful despite the chaos erupting around them. "Everyone stay calm," he said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to settle over the small group like a blanket. Even the truck driver, who looked like he could bench press a small car, found himself nodding in compliance. "Keep the lights off and stay away from the windows until I tell you otherwise." "Who the hell are you?" Betty demanded. But there was more curiosity than anger in her voice now. Something about Cale's presence was reassuring, even as everything else about the situation screamed danger. "Someone who knows what's out there," he replied simply. A sound like claws scraping against glass made Alara's blood freeze. She turned toward the front of the diner, where something was moving in the shadows beyond the rain-streaked windows. Something large and low to the ground, circling the building with predatory intent. Kyle moved to stand between her and the windows, his broad shoulders blocking her view. "Don't look at them directly," he murmured, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Some things take eye contact as a challenge." "Some things?" Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Cale, what's happening?" Before he could answer, something slammed into the front door hard enough to rattle the entire frame. The elderly couple in the corner booth clutched each other, and the truck driver pulled out a cell phone with shaking hands. "No signal," he announced grimly. "Towers must be down." Another impact, this one against the side wall. Alara could hear what sounded like snuffling and scratching, as if whatever was outside was testing the building's defenses, looking for weaknesses. "The back door," Betty said suddenly. "There's a service entrance in the kitchen that leads to the alley. We could—" "No." Cale's tone brooked no argument. "They're surrounding us. Running would only trigger their hunting instincts." "Their hunting instincts?" Alara stared at him, pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to complete starting to fall into place. His unusual grace, those amber eyes that seemed to glow in the dark, the way he'd reacted to the howling earlier. "Cale, what aren't you telling me?" He turned to look at her then, and in the red emergency lighting, his features looked almost ethereal. Beautiful and terrible and completely inhuman. Things that would sound insane if I said them out loud. A new sound cut through the night. The screech of metal being torn apart. Through the kitchen's service window, Alara could see Betty's face go white as something began systematically destroying the dumpsters in the alley behind the building. "My God!" the waitress breathed. "What do they want?" Cale's eyes found Alara across the small space, and she saw something that made her stomach drop. Recognition. Understanding. As if he knew exactly why these creatures had appeared on this particular night, at this particular place. "They want her," he said quietly. Every eye in the diner turned to Alara. She pressed herself back against the booth, shaking her head in denial. "That's impossible. I don't even know what they are." "But they know what you are." Kyle moved closer, his voice taking on an urgency that made her skin prickle. "Alara, I need you to think carefully. Has anything strange happened to you recently? Any unusual dreams, unexplained injuries, moments where you felt like you weren't entirely yourself?" She wanted to say no. Wanted to laugh off his questions and demand a rational explanation for what was happening. But as she searched her memory, fragments began to surface. The past few weeks had been filled with restless nights and dreams she couldn't quite remember upon waking. Dreams of running through dark forests, of hunting beneath a full moon, of a freedom she'd never known in her carefully controlled life. I've been having nightmares, she admitted. But that doesn't mean anything. The wedding stress, the pressure from my parents. A massive impact against the front windows cut her off. This time, spiderweb cracks appeared in the reinforced glass, and through the fractures, Alara caught a glimpse of something that shouldn't exist. Yellow eyes that burned with intelligence and malice. A muzzle full of teeth designed for tearing flesh. A creature that was neither fully wolf nor fully human, but something caught between both worlds. "Oh, Jesus!" the truck driver whispered. "What the hell is that thing?" "Trouble," Cale replied grimly. He was moving toward the front of the diner now, placing himself directly in the path of whatever was trying to break in. The kind of trouble that doesn't leave witnesses. "You're talking like you know what these things are," Betty said, her voice shaking but determined. "Like you've seen them before." "I have." His answer was simple, matter-of-fact, and terrifying in its implications. The scratching at the windows intensified, and Alara could hear more sounds now, growls and snarls that seemed to be communicating in some language she almost understood, as if part of her brain was trying to translate words that had never been meant for human ears. "They're not just hunting randomly," she realized aloud. "They're coordinating, planning." Cale shot her a sharp look. Most people wouldn't pick up on that. "Most people aren't sitting in a diner surrounded by monsters," she snapped, fear making her voice sharper than intended. "What does that make me exactly? What am I that would attract things like this?" The front window exploded inward in a shower of glass and rain. Through the jagged opening, a creature that belonged in nightmares rather than reality began to squeeze its way inside. It was massive, easily the size of a small horse, with midnight black fur and eyes that reflected the emergency lighting like mirrors. Screams filled the air as the other patrons scrambled for cover. But Alara found she couldn't move, couldn't look away from the beast that had fixed its attention on her with laser focus. Some part of her, a part she'd never acknowledged before, recognized something familiar in those burning yellow eyes. Cale stepped directly into the creature's path, and when he spoke, his voice carried a power that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. "You're not welcome here," he said, and suddenly Alara understood that she wasn't the only one in the diner who wasn't entirely human. "This human is under my protection." The creature's response was a snarl that sounded almost like laughter. When it spoke, its voice was a growling mockery of human speech. "Your protection means nothing here, Alpha. She belongs to us now. The awakening has begun." And as those words echoed through the destroyed diner, Alara felt something deep inside her chest begin to burn with a fire she'd never known existed. Chapter 5. Fire in her veins. The burning sensation in Alara's chest spread outward like wildfire, racing through her veins with an intensity that stole her breath. Every nerve ending came alive with electric awareness, and suddenly the world around her seemed impossibly sharp and detailed. She could hear heartbeats, not just her own thundering pulse, but the rapid staccato of fear from the other humans in the diner, and something else. Something slower, more controlled, emanating from Cale. The creature's yellow eyes narrowed as it studied her, nostrils flaring as if scenting something new in the air. "Yes!" it hissed, satisfaction dripping from the elongated word. "She awakens. Can you feel it, little wolf? The fire of your true nature calling to you?" "I'm not a wolf," Alara gasped, pressing her hands against her chest where the burning was strongest. But even as she said the words, some deep part of her whispered that she was lying. Cale moved with inhuman speed, placing himself directly between her and the creature. His posture had changed completely. Gone was the careful control she'd grown accustomed to, replaced by something primal and dangerous. When he spoke, his voice carried undertones that seemed to resonate in her bones. "Stand down, Garrett. This ends now." The creature, Garrett, tilted its massive head, lips pulling back in what might have been a grin if it hadn't revealed rows of razor-sharp teeth. Bold words from someone so far from his pack. "Tell me, Alpha King, how many of your wolves died looking for your precious sister?" The words hit Kale like physical blows. Alara watched his hands curl into fists, and for a moment, she could have sworn she saw claws extending from his fingertips before he pulled them back with visible effort. "Where is she?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Safe. Federal. Learning to embrace what she truly is instead of playing at being human." Garrett's attention shifted back to Alara, and she fought the urge to shrink away from that burning gaze. Just as this one will learn, once we bring her home. "Over my dead body," Kale snarled. "That can be arranged." What happened next moved too fast for human eyes to follow. Garrett launched himself at Kale with fluid grace, and suddenly the diner erupted into chaos. Tables overturned, glass shattered, and Betty screamed as she dove behind the counter with the elderly couple. But Alara found she could track every movement with crystal clarity. She watched Kale meet the creature's charge, his own body seeming to ripple and change, even as he moved. His features sharpened, his movements became more fluid, and when his hands connected with Garrett's massive form, she heard the distinct sound of claws meeting flesh. They crashed into the far wall with enough force to crack the plaster, and Alara realized with growing terror that Kale was fighting a losing battle. Whatever he was, whatever power he possessed, he was holding himself back, restraining himself from fully changing while there were human witnesses. Another creature squeezed through the broken window, then another. Yellow eyes gleamed in the emergency lighting as they began to circle the diner's interior, herding the humans into a corner while their leader battled Kale. "Run," the truck driver whispered to her, his face pale with shock. "Lady, whatever this is about, you need to get out of here." But Alara couldn't move. The burning in her chest had intensified to the point where she felt like she might spontaneously combust. Images flashed through her mind, fragments of dreams she'd dismissed as stress-induced nightmares, running through moonlit forests, the taste of wild wind on her tongue, the intoxicating scent of the hunt, and underneath it all, a name whispered in a voice she almost recognized. Luna. "The sister," she breathed, understanding hitting her like a lightning bolt. "Your sister isn't just missing. She's like me, isn't she? And they took her to force her to change." Kale threw Garrett across the room with superhuman strength, then turned to look at her. Blood ran from a gash across his cheek, but his amber eyes burned with fierce protectiveness. "Alara, you need to listen to me very carefully. Whatever you're feeling right now, whatever's happening inside you, don't fight it. Let it come." "I don't understand." "You're shifting," he said urgently, dodging another attack from Garrett. "Your wolf is awakening, and fighting it will only make you vulnerable. Trust your instincts." "Your wolf." The words should have sounded insane, should have sent her running screaming into the night. Instead, they felt like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. Alara closed her eyes and stopped fighting the fire in her veins. The change began slowly, like warmth spreading through water. Her senses sharpened until she could smell everything: fear sweat from the humans, the metallic tang of blood, the wild musk of the creatures surrounding them. She could hear conversations happening 3 blocks away, could feel the vibrations of footsteps on pavement outside. And underneath it all, she could sense something else. A connection, thin as spider silk, but unbreakable as steel, stretching from her heart to somewhere far away. Another consciousness, trapped and calling for help. Luna. There, Garrett panted, circling Kale like a predator toying with wounded prey. Do you see how easily she accepts her true nature? Your sister was the same way, once we showed her what she really was. Rage exploded through Ilara with volcanic force. How dare they take someone's sister? How dare they force this awakening on an innocent girl who'd probably been as confused and terrified as Ilara was now? She opened her eyes, and the world had changed completely. Colors were more vivid, sounds more distinct, and she could see heat signatures radiating from every living thing in the room. But more than that, she could feel the pack dynamics at play. Garrett was an alpha, but a weak one, ruling through fear rather than true strength. The other creatures were followers, dangerous but ultimately directionless without their leader. And Kale was something else entirely. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, carefully controlled but absolute in its authority. Even wounded and outnumbered, he commanded respect from every supernatural being in the room. Impressive, Garrett murmured, studying her with new interest. The bloodline is stronger than we anticipated. She'll make a valuable addition to our pack. She's not going anywhere with you, Kyle said flatly. She doesn't belong to you, Alpha King. The girl has no pack, no protection, no understanding of what she is. We're offering her a family. You're offering her slavery, Ilara said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. The fire in her chest had settled into a warm, constant presence, and with it came a confidence she'd never possessed before. And you're going to release Luna, or I'm going to make you regret the day you were born. Garrett's laugh was like broken glass. Bold words from a newly awakened pup. Do you even know how to shift yet? How to fight? How to hunt? No, she admitted, but I know how to learn. She turned to Kale, meeting his amber gaze with new understanding. Show me. Something fierce and proud flashed across his features. Are you sure? Once you fully shift, there's no going back. You'll never be fully human again. Ilara thought of Marcus, of the wedding that had seemed so important just hours ago, of the life she'd been expected to live within the narrow confines of Boston society, a life of pretty lies and careful restraint, where her true self would have remained buried forever. I was never fully human to begin with, she realized. Was I? Kale's smile was beautiful and terrible, and filled with promises she was only beginning to understand. No, my fierce girl. You weren't. Then show me what I really am. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the controlled power radiating from his skin. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. First lesson, he said, his eyes never leaving Garrett's snarling face. Never let anyone threaten your family. The change began, and Ilara felt herself falling into something vast and wild, and absolutely right. Chapter 6. The Wolf Unleashed. The transformation was nothing like the horror movies had led Ilara to believe. There was no screaming agony, no bones, breaking and reforming with sickening cracks. Instead, it felt like coming home to a body she'd never known she was missing. The change rippled through her like warm honey, starting at her core and flowing outward until every cell sang with new purpose. Her vision sharpened until she could see individual dust motes dancing in the emergency lighting. Her hearing expanded to encompass the terrified breathing of the humans cowering behind the counter, the steady drum of rain on the roof, and the subtle sounds of more creatures moving through the streets outside. But it was the sense that nearly overwhelmed her. The metallic tang of fear sweat, the wild musk of the intruders, the comforting woodsy scent that was uniquely Kale's, and underneath it all, something that made her newly awakened wolf bristle with protective rage. The lingering trace of tears and terror that clung to Garrett like a second skin. Luna's tears. A growl built in her chest, low and threatening, as understanding crystallized with perfect clarity. This creature, this thing wearing the shape of a wolf, had been the one to steal an innocent girl from her family. Had torn her away from everything she knew and loved. "Easy," Kyle murmured beside her, his voice a steadying anchor in the storm of new sensations. "Feel the change, but don't let it control you. You're still you, Alara. Just more." She turned to look at him and saw that he had partially shifted as well. His features were sharper, more defined, and his amber eyes glowed with inner fire. Claws had extended from his fingertips, and when he smiled, she caught a glimpse of fangs. He was magnificent and terrifying and absolutely beautiful. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. "Alive," she whispered, and realized it was the first time in her life the word had been completely true. "More alive than I've ever been." Garrett snarled from across the room, his massive form tense with barely controlled violence. "How touching. A mating bond forming right before my eyes. Too bad neither of you will survive long enough to explore it." Mating bond. The word sent heat spiraling through Alara's transformed senses, but she pushed the feeling aside. There would be time to explore whatever was building between her and Kale later. Right now, they had a monster to deal with. "You made a mistake coming here," she said, her voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate through the room. "You should have stayed in whatever hole you crawled out of." Big words from a pup who shifted for the first time 5 minutes ago. Garrett's yellow eyes gleamed with malicious amusement. "Do you even know what you are, little wolf? What your bloodline means? I know I'm strong enough to make you pay for what you've done to Luna." Something flickered across Garrett's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "Luna told you her name? Impossible. The bond isn't fully formed yet, and you're too new to—" "The bond is stronger than you think," Kale interrupted, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with Alara. "Some connections transcend pack law and blood relations. You should have researched your target more carefully before making your move." "What are you talking about?" Alara asked, though part of her was beginning to understand. The connection she felt to Luna wasn't just sympathy for another kidnapping victim. It was something deeper, older, written into the very fabric of her DNA. "Later," Kale promised. "Right now, we have more pressing concerns." The other creatures had been circling closer while they talked, yellow eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. Alara counted 4 of them plus Garrett. Not impossible odds, but challenging for someone who had literally learned she was a werewolf 15 minutes ago. "Betty," she called softly, not taking her eyes off the threats surrounding them. "Is there a back exit from the kitchen?" "Yes," came the trembling reply from behind the counter. "Service door leads to the alley. Take the others and go. Now." "What about you?" the waitress asked. Alara felt a fierce smile curve her lips, and she knew without looking that it probably revealed fangs. "We'll be fine." She heard the soft sounds of the humans making their escape, and something inside her relaxed, knowing they were out of harm's way. The wolf in her approved of protecting the innocent, even if it meant facing greater danger herself. "Admirable," Garrett said mockingly. "But ultimately pointless. They'll only spread stories about what they saw here tonight. Stories that will draw unwanted attention to our kind." "Our kind?" Alara's voice carried a note of disgust. "You're nothing like us. We protect people. You terrorize them. How naive. You think there's some noble code that governs what we are? Some honor system that makes us the good guys?" Garrett's laugh was harsh. "We're predators, little wolf. apex predators. The sheep exist for our benefit, not the other way around. You're wrong, Kale said quietly, his voice carrying absolute certainty. And that's why you'll lose. The attack came without warning. Garrett lunged forward with inhuman speed, his massive form aimed directly at Alara. But her newly awakened reflexes proved faster than even she had expected. She rolled aside, letting his momentum carry him past her, then spun to rake claws across his flank as he tried to recover. The creature's howl of pain and rage shook the windows, but Alara felt only satisfaction. First blood to her. The other wolves moved in coordination, trying to separate her from Kale, but they had underestimated the bond forming between them. Without conscious thought, they moved as a unit, covering each other's blind spots and striking with devastating efficiency. Alara discovered that fighting in this form was like remembering a dance she'd learned in childhood. Every movement felt natural, instinctive, as if her muscles had been waiting her entire life for permission to move this way. When one of Garrett's followers tried to flank her, she spun and caught him across the throat with claws that felt like an extension of her own will. Beside her, Kale fought with the controlled violence of someone who had been trained for battle since birth. His movements were economical, precise, wasting no energy on showmanship. He was protecting her, she realized, positioning himself to take the brunt of the attacks while giving her space to learn her new capabilities. The thought made something warm and fierce bloom in her chest. No one had ever protected her like this. Marcus had always treated her like a fragile flower that needed to be shielded from any real challenge. But Kale fought beside her as an equal, trusting her to hold her own while still covering her weaknesses. Two of the attacking wolves were down, whimpering in corners, when Garrett finally managed to land a solid hit. His claws raked across Kale's shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into an overturned table. Kale! Alara's cry held notes of anguish that seemed to echo through the room. I'm fine, he gasped, struggling to his feet. Blood ran down his arm, but his eyes still burned with determination. Keep fighting. Garrett's laugh was triumphant. Not so confident now, are we? And this is just the beginning. Wait until you see what we've done to your precious Luna. How we've trained her to embrace her true nature. The words hit Alara like physical blows, and suddenly the careful control she'd been maintaining snapped. Rage flooded through her transformed senses, white-hot and absolute. The wolf inside her threw back its head and howled with a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. When she looked at Garrett again, her vision had gone silver bright, and she could feel power coursing through her veins like molten metal. You, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the remaining windows tremble, are going to tell me exactly where she is. And then you're going to pray I'm feeling merciful. Garrett's confident expression faltered for the first time. What are you? Kale's voice came from behind her, filled with wonder and something that sounded like reverence. She's not just any wolf, you fool. Look at her eyes. Look at the way the others are submitting to her presence. Alara glanced around and realized he was right. The wounded wolves had stopped their whimpering and were now lying flat against the floor, necks exposed in gestures of absolute submission. Even Garrett had unconsciously taken a step backward. What does that mean? She asked. Kale's smile was fierce with pride. It means you're not just a wolf, my fierce girl. You're an alpha, and not just any alpha. His amber eyes met hers across the destroyed diner. You're a true alpha, one of the rarest bloodlines in existence. And as those words sank in, Alara felt the world shift around her once again. Chapter 7. The Weight of Power. The silver light in Sauksaikano, Alara's eyes pulsed with each heartbeat, and she could feel something ancient and powerful stirring in her blood. Around the destroyed diner, Every supernatural being had gone completely still, as if the air itself had become too heavy to move through. Even Garrett, who moments before had been radiating smug confidence, now looked like he was fighting the urge to bare his throat in submission. "A true alpha," he whispered, his voice holding equal parts awe and terror. "Impossible! Your bloodline was supposed to be extinct. We made sure of it." "What do you mean?" Alara demanded, taking a step forward. The power coursing through her veins felt like liquid starlight, beautiful and terrible and barely contained. "What happened to my bloodline?" Garrett's yellow eyes darted toward the broken windows, calculating distances and escape routes. "Your family was eliminated decades ago. Every last one of them hunted down and killed to prevent exactly this moment." "My family?" Confusion cut through her rage like a blade. "My parents are alive. They're probably at home right now, worried sick about—" "Your adoptive parents," Kyle said quietly, understanding dawning in his amber eyes. "Alara, you were adopted, weren't you? Probably as a very young child, with no memory of your birth family." The words hit her like a physical blow. Images flashed through her mind, fragments of memories she'd always dismissed as childhood nightmares. A woman with silver eyes singing lullabies in a language that sounded like wind through trees. The scent of pine and snow and something wild. The sound of howling in the distance, calling her home to a place she'd never been. "They never told me," she breathed. "All these years, they never said a word." "They were protecting you," Kale said gently, "keeping you hidden until your powers awakened naturally. It was the only way to keep you safe." "Safe from what?" But even as she asked the question, she was beginning to understand. The burning in her chest, the connection she felt to Luna, the way every supernatural being in the room was now looking at her with a mixture of fear and reverence. It all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. "From wolves like him," Kale said, nodding toward Garrett. "From those who would use your power for their own ends, or destroy you to prevent anyone else from claiming it." Garrett snarled, his form beginning to shimmer as he prepared to shift fully. The Silver Moon bloodline died for good reason. True alphas are too dangerous to be allowed to exist. They disrupt the natural order, challenge the established packs. "They protect the innocent," Alara interrupted, her voice carrying new harmonics that made the surviving windows tremble. "Something you clearly know nothing about." "Protect?" Garrett's laugh was bitter. "Is that what you think this power is for? You have no idea what you're capable of, little wolf. The ability to command any supernatural being, to bend them to your will with nothing more than a thought. You could rule over every pack in North America if you chose to." The temptation was there, sudden and seductive. Alara could feel the truth of his words resonating in her bones. The power flowing through her was vast, ancient, and absolutely intoxicating. She could sense the pack bonds of every wolf in the room, could feel how easily she could reach out and claim them as her own. But the thought of Luna, alone, terrified, probably fighting the same overwhelming sensations Alara was experiencing right now, cut through the temptation like a blade. "Where is she?" Alara demanded, her power flaring outward until even Kale took an involuntary step back. "Where are you keeping Luna?" Garrett's resistance crumbled under the weight of her alpha command. The words spilled from his lips before he could stop them. "Warehouse District, Pier 47. But you're too late. The ritual begins at midnight. By dawn, she'll be bound to our pack permanently." "What ritual?" Kale's voice held a deadly edge. "The claiming," Garrett said, his form beginning to blur as his control slipped. "An ancient ceremony that forces a wolf to accept a new pack bond, even against their will. Once it's complete, she'll have no choice but to obey our alpha's commands." Horror flooded through Alara as she realized what they were describing. "You're talking about slavery. Mental slavery." "I'm talking about order," Garrett snarled. "Your sister was too strong, too willful to be controlled through normal means. But the claiming will strip away her ability to resist. She'll become the perfect soldier, the perfect weapon." "Over my dead body," Kale growled, his partially shifted form radiating lethal intent. "That can be arranged." Garrett's transformation accelerated, his human features melting away as he prepared for a final, desperate attack. "Kill them both. The true alpha cannot be allowed to live." The remaining wolves lunged forward as one, but they never reached their targets. Alara's power exploded outward like a shockwave, slamming into them with crushing force. She felt their pack bonds snap under the pressure of her will, felt their aggressive intent crumble into confused submission. When the silver light faded from her eyes, all three wolves lay flat on their bellies, necks exposed, whimpering like beaten dogs. "Impressive," Kale said softly, though she caught the hint of wariness in his voice. "I've never seen anyone break pack bonds so completely." "I didn't mean to," Alara whispered, staring at the submissive wolves with growing horror. "I just wanted them to stop attacking us." "Intent matters with true alpha power," he explained, moving to stand beside her. "You wanted to protect us, so your wolf did what was necessary to neutralize the threat. But Ilara?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "That level of power can be addictive. It would be very easy to start using it for lesser reasons." She nodded, understanding the warning. The rush of absolute control had been intoxicating, and part of her was already craving the feeling again. How do you resist it? By remembering that power without restraint isn't strength. It's tyranny. His amber eyes met hers with steady intensity. "And by having someone you trust to call you back if you start to lose yourself." The words held weight that went beyond their immediate situation, and Alara felt something shift between them. This wasn't just about rescuing Luna anymore. It was about trust, partnership, and the kind of connection that could either save them both or destroy everything they touched. "The warehouse," she said, forcing herself to focus on their immediate goal. "How long do we have?" Kale glanced at his watch, his expression grim. 3 hours until midnight. Enough time to reach Pier 47, but not enough to plan properly. "Then we don't plan," Alara said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "We go in, we find Luna, and we get her out. Everything else is secondary." "It's not that simple. If they're performing the claiming ritual, they'll have prepared defenses. Wards to prevent shifting, barriers to contain alpha power." "Let them try," she interrupted, silver light flickering in her eyes again. "They want to see what a true alpha is capable of." "They're about to find out." Kale studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But we do this together. No heroic sacrifices, no going off alone to protect me. We're partners in this." "Partners," she agreed, the word tasting right on her tongue. Around them, the submitted wolves remained motionless, waiting for commands that would never come. Alara looked at them with something that might have been pity. "You have a choice," she told them. "You can return to whatever pack sent you here, and tell them that the Silver Moon bloodline has returned. Or you can choose a different path entirely. But you will never again hunt innocent people. You will never again force your will on those weaker than yourselves. Do you understand?" 3 heads nodded in unison, and she felt the truth of their acceptance settle into her bones. "Go," she commanded, and they scrambled for the broken windows with desperate haste. Garrett remained on the floor, his yellow eyes burning with impotent rage. "This isn't over, true alpha. There are forces at work here that you don't understand. Powers that won't be denied by one newly awakened wolf, no matter how strong. We'll see, Alara said simply. As they prepared to leave the destroyed diner behind, Kale caught her arm gently. Are you ready for this? Once we walk out that door, there's no going back to your old life. The supernatural world will know what you are, and they'll never stop trying to either claim you or destroy you. Alara thought of Marcus, of the wedding that felt like it had happened in another lifetime, of the carefully controlled existence she'd been living without even knowing it was a cage. I was never meant for that life anyway, she said. Let's go save your sister. Chapter 8. Into the Wolf's Den. The warehouse district lay shrouded in fog rolling off Boston Harbor, transforming the industrial landscape into something from a nightmare. Alara crouched beside Kale on the rooftop of an abandoned cannery, studying Pier 47 through the swirling mist. The building they sought rose like a monolith against the storm-dark sky, its windows glowing with an eerie amber light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. How many? She whispered, her enhanced senses picking up movement in the shadows below. At least 24, Kyle replied grimly, his amber eyes tracking figures that moved with inhuman grace around the warehouse perimeter. More than we faced at the diner, and these will be better trained. Prepared. Alara nodded, trying to ignore the way her newly awakened instincts screamed warnings about the energy emanating from the building. Something was wrong here, something that went beyond simple pack politics or territorial disputes. The very air tasted of old magic and fresh blood. The ritual, she said suddenly, pieces of a horrifying puzzle clicking into place. It's not just about forcing Luna to accept a new pack bond, is it? They're using her for something else. Kale's jaw tightened. True alpha bloodlines carry more than just the ability to command other wolves. Your family line was one of the original sources of supernatural power in North America. If they can tap into that through Luna, they could create their own true alpha, Alara finished, ice forming in her veins, or amplify their existing alpha's power beyond natural limits. Exactly. And with that kind of strength, they could challenge the established pack territories. Start a war that would tear apart the careful balance we've maintained for decades. The implications hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just about saving one kidnapped girl. It was about preventing a supernatural conflict that could spill over into the human world. The responsibility felt crushing, but underneath the fear, something fierce and protective burned in her chest. We can't let that happen, she said simply. No, he agreed. We can't. They made their way down from the rooftop in silence, moving with the fluid grace that came naturally to their shifted forms. Alara marveled at how different her body felt now. Stronger, faster, more alive than she'd ever imagined possible. The wedding dress had long since been abandoned in favor of clothes Kale had procured from somewhere, and she felt like she could take on the world. The first guard never saw them coming. Alara moved on pure instinct, her hand covering the wolf's muzzle before he could raise an alarm. She felt his submission to her alpha power wash over them both, and for a moment, the temptation to simply command all the guards to stand down was overwhelming. Too easy, Kyle murmured, somehow reading her thoughts. If you use your power that broadly, their alpha will sense it immediately. We need to get closer before we reveal what you are. She nodded, forcing herself to rely on stealth instead of supernatural compulsion. They worked their way around the building's perimeter, taking down guards with efficient precision. Each victory felt like a small triumph, proof that she was more than just raw power. She was a warrior. The side entrance they found was almost insultingly easy to breach. No locks, no additional security, just a simple door that opened at Kale's touch. Trap? Alara whispered. Definitely, he confirmed. but we're going in anyway. The interior of the warehouse had been transformed into something that belonged in a Gothic cathedral rather than an industrial building. Massive pillars carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly stretched toward a vaulted ceiling lost in shadows. Torches burned in iron brackets along the walls, casting dancing light that made the carved wolves seem to move and snarl. And in the center of it all, suspended above a circle of glowing runes, was Luna. Even from a distance, Alara could see the family resemblance between Kale and his sister. Luna had the same amber eyes, the same sharp cheekbones. But where Kale radiated controlled power, Luna looked fragile and ethereal. She hung unconscious in chains of what looked like silver, her dark hair falling around her face like a curtain. The binding circle. Kale breathed, his voice tight with anguish. They're using her blood to power the runes. If the ritual completes... It won't, Alara said with fierce certainty. We're getting her out of here. Touching, really. The voice came from the shadows near the altar, smooth and cultured and absolutely terrifying in its casual confidence. A figure stepped into the torchlight, tall, elegantly dressed, with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. When he smiled, Alara caught a glimpse of fangs that seemed longer and sharper than any she'd seen before. "Welcome to my humble sanctuary," the man continued, spreading his arms wide. "I am Sebastian Cross, Alpha of the Shadowfang Pack, and you, my dear, are exactly what I've been waiting for." Every instinct Alara possessed screamed danger. This wasn't just another Pack Alpha. This was something older, more powerful, with an aura of dark authority that made her wolf want to curl up and hide. "Let her go," Kyle demanded, stepping protectively in front of Alara. "Your quarrel is with me, Sebastian. Luna is innocent in all of this." "Innocent?" Sebastian laughed, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Oh, my dear Kyle, you still don't understand, do you? Your sister was never the prize. She was merely the bait." Horror flooded through Alara as understanding dawned. "You knew I would come. I was counting on it." Sebastian's ice-blue eyes locked onto hers with predatory intensity. The last true alpha bloodline, hidden away and protected for so many years. Do you have any idea how long I've been searching for you? "Since you murdered my family," she said quietly, silver light beginning to flicker in her eyes. "Since I liberated the supernatural world from their tyranny," he corrected. "True alphas are evolutionary dead ends, you see. Too powerful for their own good, too idealistic to make the hard choices necessary for survival. The Silver Moon line had to be eliminated. But you kept me alive. I had nothing to do with your survival, child. That was pure chance. Your parents managing to hide you before my hunters found them. But chance has a way of correcting itself." His smile widened, revealing more of those terrible fangs. "Tonight, the last true alpha dies, and I claim her power for my own." The ritual circle flared with sudden light, and Luna's eyes snapped open. Even from across the warehouse, Alara could see the terror and pain in those amber depths. Worse, she could feel Luna's thoughts pressing against her mind. Fragmented pleas for help mixed with warnings about the trap they'd walked into. "The binding is almost complete," Sebastian continued conversationally. "In a few minutes, your sister's life force will be permanently linked to mine. Her power, her abilities, even her memories will become part of my collection. And then..." He gestured, and suddenly the warehouse was full of wolves. They emerged from the shadows like living nightmares, their eyes glowing with reflected torchlight. Dozens of them, all bearing the same silver and black markings that identified them as Shadowfang Pack. Then we'll see how long a newly awakened true alpha can last against an entire pack enhanced with stolen power. Alara felt Kale tense beside her, saw him calculating odds and distances with the precision of someone who'd been fighting for his life since childhood. They were outnumbered 20-1, trapped in an enclosed space with no obvious exits, facing an enemy who had been planning this confrontation for decades. Any rational person would surrender, would try to negotiate, to find some way to escape with their lives intact. But as Alara looked at Luna hanging helpless in those silver chains, as she felt the terror and pain radiating from the girl who shared her impossible bloodline, rationality became irrelevant. "Kyle," she said softly, power beginning to build in her voice. "When I give the signal, get to Luna. Cut her down and get her out of here." "What about you?" She turned to look at him, and he stepped back involuntarily at what he saw in her eyes. The silver light was blazing now, bright enough to cast shadows on the warehouse walls. "I'm going to teach Sebastian Cross why my family line was feared by every supernatural predator in North America." The power in her voice made the very air shimmer, and around the warehouse Sebastian's wolves began to whimper. "Now," she said, and let her true alpha nature explode outward like a supernova. Chapter 9. The True Alpha's Fury. The warehouse erupted into chaos as Alara's power slammed into the assembled pack like a tidal wave of pure authority. The silver light emanating from her eyes cast everything in stark relief, and the ancient runes carved into the pillars began to glow in response to her presence. Around the cavernous space, Sebastian's wolves dropped to their bellies, whimpering as their pack bonds wavered under the crushing weight of her true alpha nature. But Sebastian himself remained standing, his ice-blue eyes blazing with hunger as he absorbed the display of raw power. "Magnificent," he breathed, taking a step closer despite the supernatural pressure radiating from her. "Even more potent than I dared hope. Yes, you'll do nicely." Kale didn't waste time with words. The moment Alara's power created an opening, he moved with lethal precision toward the ritual circle where Luna hung suspended. His partially shifted form cut through the disoriented wolves like a blade, each movement calculated to minimize resistance while maximizing speed. "Stop him!" Sebastian snarled, but his command fell on deaf ears. The wolves caught in Alara's influence couldn't process orders from any alpha but her, their supernatural hierarchy completely overturned by her presence. Alara felt a savage satisfaction as she watched Kale reach the silver chains binding Luna. Her enhanced senses picked up every detail, the way the metal burned his hands as he worked to free his sister, the shallow breathing that indicated Luna was still alive despite her ordeal, the complex web of magical energy that connected the ritual circle to Sebastian himself. "You think breaking a few chains will stop what I've set in motion?" Sebastian's voice carried new harmonics now, deeper and more resonant than before. "The ritual has already begun. Her power is flowing into me with every heartbeat." Alara could see the truth of his words in the pulsing light of the runes. Dark energy snaked upward from Luna's suspended form, feeding into symbols that grew brighter with each passing second. Even if they freed her now, the damage might already be done. "Then I'll just have to take it back," Alara said, advancing on Sebastian with predatory grace. His laugh was like breaking glass. "Take it back? Child, you have no idea what you're dealing with. I've spent 40 years perfecting the art of stealing power from other supernaturals. Your sister's abilities are already becoming part of me, just as yours will be when I'm finished with you." He gestured with one hand, and suddenly the air around Alara felt thick as honey. The oppressive weight of ancient magic pressed down on her from all sides, trying to force her to her knees. She recognized it as the same binding spell that held Luna captive, a trap designed specifically to contain true alpha power. For a moment, panic clawed at her throat. The magic was stronger than anything she'd ever faced, woven with malicious intent and powered by decades of stolen energy. It wrapped around her like chains, seeking to drain away her strength and feed it to Sebastian's ritual. But then she remembered Kale's words from the diner. Intent matters with true alpha power. Sebastian intended to steal and corrupt, to use supernatural abilities for domination and control. But Alara's intent was pure. She wanted to protect the innocent, to save Luna, to stop a monster from gaining power he would use to hurt others. The binding spell shattered like spun glass. Sebastian's confident expression faltered as silver light exploded outward from Alara's position. The stolen power he'd been accumulating for decades recoiled from her presence, recognizing something fundamentally incompatible with his dark magic. "Impossible," he whispered, taking an involuntary step backward. The binding circle was designed to contain any supernatural being. It should hold even a true alpha. "Maybe it would hold a normal true alpha," Alara agreed, stalking toward him with fluid grace. "But I'm not normal, am I? My bloodline is something special, something you've been hunting for 40 years because you know it threatens everything you've built." Around them, the warehouse had become a battleground of competing powers. Kyle had managed to free Luna from her chains and was carrying her toward what looked like a loading dock, but their escape route was blocked by wolves slowly recovering from Alara's initial display of authority. She could feel their pack bonds reasserting themselves, Sebastian's influence fighting against hers for control. "You're strong," Sebastian admitted, his form beginning to shimmer as he prepared to shift. "Stronger than your parents were. But strength without knowledge is just raw power waiting to be harvested." He completed his transformation in a burst of dark energy that made Alara's enhanced vision flare with afterimages. Where the elegant man had stood, a creature of nightmare now crouched, a wolf the size of a small horse with fur like liquid shadow and eyes that burned with stolen fire. When he opened his muzzle, she could see rows of fangs that gleamed like silver blades. The battle that followed was unlike anything Alara could have imagined. Sebastian moved with inhuman speed, his enhanced abilities making him faster and stronger than any natural wolf. But Alara's true alpha nature gave her something he couldn't steal, an absolute understanding of supernatural hierarchy and the authority to enforce it. Every time he lunged at her, she was already moving, her body flowing like water around his attacks. When his claws raked across her arm, drawing blood, she retaliated with strikes that carried the full weight of her ancestral power. The warehouse echoed with the sounds of their conflict, snarls and howls that spoke of primal forces clashing in ways that predated human civilization. But Sebastian had one advantage she couldn't match: experience. He'd been fighting for decades, accumulating power and knowledge while she'd been living as a human, completely unaware of her supernatural nature. His attacks grew more precise as he adapted to her fighting style, and she realized with growing dread that raw power alone might not be enough. A particularly vicious swipe of his claws sent her crashing into one of the carved pillars. Stone chips rained down as she struggled to her feet, tasting blood in her mouth. Across the warehouse, she could see Kyle still fighting to clear an escape route. Luna's unconscious form draped across his shoulders. "You fight well for an untrained pup," Sebastian said, his voice a rumbling growl that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. "But this ends now. I have what I came for." He gestured toward the ritual circle, and Alara's heart sank as she realized the truth. Even with Luna freed from the chains, the magical connection hadn't been severed. Dark energy still flowed from the girl toward the glowing runes, feeding Sebastian's power with every passing second. "The ritual doesn't require her physical presence," he explained with smug satisfaction. "Only her blood, which I've already taken. By dawn, her abilities will be completely integrated into my own, and the Silver Moon bloodline will finally serve its proper purpose." Rage beyond anything she'd ever experienced flooded through Alara's transformed senses. This monster had orchestrated everything. Luna's kidnapping, the attack on the diner, even her own awakening. All so he could steal power that didn't belong to him. Use it to dominate and control, to turn something pure into a weapon of oppression. "You made one mistake," she said, silver light beginning to blaze from her eyes with nuclear intensity. "And what's that?" "You assumed I was fighting for Luna." Her voice carried harmonics that made the very foundations of the building tremble. "But I'm not fighting for her. I'm fighting for every innocent person you've hurt, every supernatural being you've enslaved, every life you've destroyed in your quest for power." The true scope of her true alpha nature exploded outward like a star going supernova. Every wolf in the warehouse, Sebastian's pack, the guards outside, even creatures blocks away, felt the crushing weight of her authority pressing down on them. But more than that, they felt her intent, pure and unwavering and absolutely implacable. She wasn't just commanding their submission. She was offering them something Sebastian never could. A choice to be better than their worst instincts. One by one, the Shadowfang wolves began to turn toward their alpha with new understanding in their eyes. Understanding that they'd been following a monster, and that redemption was still possible if they chose it. Sebastian's howl of rage and disbelief shook dust from the rafters as he realized what was happening. His pack was abandoning him, and Alara was just getting started. Chapter 10. Breaking the Chains. Sebastian's form writhed with dark energy as his pack bonds snapped one by one, each severed, connections sending visible ripples of pain across his supernatural aura. The wolves that had served him for decades now stood with heads bowed toward Alara, recognizing in her something they'd forgotten existed, an alpha who led through inspiration rather than fear. "No!" Sebastian's roar shook the warehouse rafters. "I am your alpha! You are bound to me by blood and ritual." But his commands fell on deaf ears. The Shadowfang pack had tasted true leadership for the first time in their lives, and there was no going back. Alara felt their pack bonds seeking her, not as chains of servitude, but as willing connections between equals. The sensation was intoxicating. Dozens of supernatural beings choosing to follow her not because they had to, but because they wanted to. "This is what you never understood," Alara said, advancing on Sebastian with predatory grace. Silver light pulsed from her skin in rhythm with her heartbeat, and where it touched the carved pillars, the dark symbols began to crack and fade. Real power isn't taken. It's given freely. Sebastian's massive wolf form circled her warily, his stolen abilities making him physically stronger, but emotionally brittle. 40 years of ruling through intimidation had left him unable to comprehend what was happening to his carefully constructed empire. "Pretty words," he snarled, "but you're still just one wolf against me. And I have 40 years of accumulated power flowing through my veins." "Do you?" Alara tilted her head, studying the dark energy that writhed around his form like living smoke. "Or do you have 40 years of stolen pain and resentment that's finally found a way to escape?" Her words hit their mark with surgical precision. The supernatural abilities Sebastian had taken by force weren't just raw power. They were pieces of other beings' souls, torn away through violence and held in place by will alone. And now, faced with a true alpha whose very nature represented justice and redemption, those stolen fragments were beginning to remember where they truly belonged. Wisps of energy began to peel away from Sebastian's form, seeking their original owners. Some dissolved into nothingness, their sources long dead, but others flowed toward the assembled wolves, returning abilities that had been taken decades ago. "Stop this!" Sebastian lunged at her with desperate fury, his claws extended and fangs bared. But his movements were becoming sluggish as his stolen power abandoned him, and Alara sidestepped the attack with fluid ease. Across the warehouse, she could see Kale had reached the loading dock with Luna. The girl was stirring in his arms, her amber eyes fluttering open as the ritual's influence weakened. But the magical connection between her and the glowing runes still pulsed with malevolent energy, feeding the last vestiges of Sebastian's stolen power. The ritual circle, Alara realized. It's not just drawing from Luna, it's drawing from all of them. She could see it now with her enhanced perception. Threads of dark energy connected every member of the Shadowfang pack to the central runic array, siphoning away small portions of their strength to fuel Sebastian's transformation. He hadn't just stolen power from his victims. He'd been slowly draining his own followers for decades. "You've been a parasite," she said with quiet disgust. "Feeding on everyone around you, taking what you needed and discarding the rest." "I've been a survivor." Sebastian's response was more animal than human now, his form beginning to blur as the stolen power that held his enhanced shape in place continued to unravel. "In a world where strength is the only currency that matters, I did what was necessary to thrive." "You did what was easy," Alara corrected. "Taking instead of earning, conquering instead of leading." She raised her hand, and silver light began to gather in her palm like captured starlight. But easy roads never lead anywhere worth going. The power she summoned wasn't the crushing authority she'd used before. This was something gentler but infinitely more potent, the ability to heal what had been broken, to restore what had been stolen, to offer redemption to those who sought it. She pressed her hand against the nearest carved pillar, and the ancient symbols exploded with brilliant light. The dark magic Sebastian had woven into the warehouse's very structure began to unravel, decades of accumulated malevolence burning away like fog before sunrise. "No!" Sebastian's desperate lunge carried him across half the warehouse, but he was no longer the unstoppable predator he'd been moments before. Without his stolen power, he was just another wolf, larger than most, more vicious than any, but ultimately mortal. Alara caught him in mid-leap, her hand closing around his throat with gentle but implacable strength. "It's over, Sebastian. Your pack has chosen freedom, your ritual is breaking apart, and your stolen power is returning to where it belongs." "You think this ends with me?" he gasped, his form flickering between human and wolf as his control slipped completely. "I'm not the only one who knows what you are. Others will come. Others who've spent even longer perfecting the art of harvesting supernatural abilities." "Let them come," she said simply. "But they'll find something they're not prepared for." "And what's that?" Alara smiled, and for the first time since her transformation began, it held no trace of predatory intent. Only warmth, compassion, and absolute certainty. They'll find a true alpha who remembers what that title actually means. She released him, and Sebastian collapsed to the warehouse floor, his supernatural abilities completely drained. Around them, the former Shadowfang pack watched with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, free for the first time in decades but unsure what freedom actually meant. "You have a choice now," Alara told them, her voice carrying easily through the vast space. "You can stay and try to build something better from what's left of this place. You can seek out other packs who might accept you. Or you can walk away from this life entirely and find your own paths." "What about you?" one of them asked, a scarred female with graying fur and eyes that held too much painful wisdom. "Will you lead us?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Alara could feel the weight of their expectation, the desperate hope that she might provide the guidance they'd been denied for so long. It would be easy to say yes, to gather them under her protection and build the kind of pack the supernatural world desperately needed. But as she looked across the warehouse to where Kale was gently checking Luna's vital signs, she realized that her path lay elsewhere. "I'm not here to replace what you lost," she said gently. "I'm here to help you remember that you never needed someone else to tell you how to be good. That strength was always inside you. You just forgot how to access it." She walked toward the ritual circle, power flowing from her hands to dissolve the dark magic that still connected Luna to Sebastian's failing spell. The runes cracked and went dark one by one, their stolen energy dissipating harmlessly into the night air. "The bonds are broken," she announced as the last symbol faded. "All of them. You're free to choose your own destinies now." Kale met her eyes across the warehouse, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Not just gratitude or relief, but recognition of what she'd become. Not just a powerful supernatural being, but a leader who understood that true strength came from lifting others up, rather than holding them down. "Is it over?" Luna asked weakly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It's over," Alara confirmed, kneeling beside Kyle and his sister. "You're safe now. Both of you." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. Sebastian's warning echoed in her mind. Others would come, drawn by rumors of the last true alpha. The supernatural world would never stop testing her, challenging her, trying to claim or destroy the power she represented. The difference was that now she was ready for them, and she wouldn't be facing them alone. Chapter 11. Dawn of Something New. The first rays of dawn painted the Boston harbor in shades of gold and amber as Alara stood on the warehouse's loading dock, watching the former Shadowfang pack members disperse into the morning light. Some left alone, others in small groups, but all carried themselves differently than they had just hours before. Their movements held a tentative freedom, like prisoners who'd forgotten what sunlight felt like. Luna sat propped against a shipping container, wrapped in Kale's leather jacket, and sipping coffee from a thermos someone had thoughtfully provided. The ordeal had left her pale and shaken, but her amber eyes held the same fierce intelligence that marked all the members of her bloodline. She studied Alara with open curiosity, as if trying to solve a particularly complex puzzle. "So," Luna said, her voice still weak but gaining strength with each word, "you're the true alpha everyone's been whispering about. The one who just dismantled a supernatural empire without throwing a single punch." "I threw several punches," Alara corrected with a small smile. "Your brother can attest to that." "She nearly brought the whole building down," Kale confirmed from where he stood guard near the warehouse entrance. Even in the growing daylight, his amber eyes continued to track potential threats with predatory focus. "I've never seen anything like it." Luna's gaze shifted between them, and something knowing flickered across her features. "Interesting. The bond between you two is unusual." "What do you mean?" Alara asked, though part of her suspected she already knew the answer. "True alphas don't typically form romantic attachments," Luna explained, settling back against the container with obvious exhaustion. "The power tends to isolate them, make them too overwhelming for normal relationships. But you and my brother..." She tilted her head, studying the way they unconsciously moved in sync with each other. "You complement each other instead of competing." Heat flooded Alara's cheeks as she realized how obvious their connection must be to someone with Luna's supernatural senses. "It's complicated." "The best relationships usually are," Luna replied with a ghost of a smile. "Though I have to say, your timing could use some work. Yesterday you were human, today you're the most powerful supernatural being on the East Coast. That's quite an adjustment period." "Tell me about it," Alara muttered, flexing her fingers and watching silver light dance briefly between them before fading. The power was still there, vast and patient, waiting for her next command. But it no longer felt foreign or overwhelming, just another part of herself she was learning to understand. Kale approached them with careful steps, his enhanced hearing picking up sounds from the surrounding streets. The authorities will be here soon. Someone must have called in the disturbance from last night. What do we tell them? Alara asked, gesturing toward the destroyed warehouse behind them. The building looked like it had been hit by a localized earthquake, with cracks running through the walls and most of the windows blown out. Nothing, Luna said firmly. Humans have a remarkable ability to rationalize away things that don't fit their worldview. Gas explosion, structural failure, freak storm damage. They'll find an explanation that makes sense to them. And Sebastian? Kyle's expression darkened. Gone by the time I checked the warehouse floor. Crawled away like the coward he always was, probably to lick his wounds and plan his next move. Alara felt a flicker of unease. She'd defeated Sebastian, broken his power and freed his pack, but the man himself remained a threat. Wounded predators were often the most dangerous, and she had no doubt he'd be seeking revenge for what she'd cost him. He'll be back, she said quietly. Yes, Kyle agreed, but not anytime soon. You stripped away 40 years of accumulated power. It'll take him decades to rebuild even a fraction of what he lost. And by then I'll be ready for him. Alara finished with quiet certainty. The thought should have been terrifying. A lifetime of watching over her shoulder, waiting for the next supernatural threat to emerge from the shadows. Instead, she felt oddly peaceful about it. This was her purpose, what she'd been born to do. Not to hide from her nature, but to embrace it and use it to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Luna struggled to her feet, swaying slightly before Kyle steadied her with a gentle hand. I should get back to our pack. They'll be worried sick, and there are preparations to make. Preparations for what? Alara asked. Luna and Kale exchanged a look that spoke of shared understanding built over years of sibling communication. The supernatural world doesn't exist in isolation, Luna explained. There are councils, territories, ancient agreements that keep the peace between different groups. What happened here last night will send ripples through all of them. Sebastian's pack wasn't acting alone, Kale added grimly. He had allies, other alphas who shared his philosophy about power and dominance. When they learn what you're capable of, they'll either try to recruit me or eliminate me, Alara concluded. Wonderful. Not necessarily, Luna said with surprising optimism. Yes, some will see you as a threat to be neutralized, but others will recognize what you represent. A return to the old ways, when alphas led by example instead of intimidation. The sound of sirens in the distance reminded them that their time was running out. Soon the area would be crawling with police, firefighters, and investigators who would ask questions none of them could answer honestly. There's something else, Luna said, her voice taking on a formal tone that seemed oddly ceremonial. Something that needs to be addressed before we go our separate ways. She turned to face Alara directly, her amber eyes glowing with subtle power. You saved my life, freed me from a fate worse than death, and liberated an entire pack from supernatural slavery. By the ancient laws that govern our kind, I owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid. You don't owe me anything, Alara protested. I did what anyone would have done. No, Luna said firmly. You did what a true alpha would have done, and that makes all the difference. She glanced at her brother, some silent communication passing between them. We'd like to offer you our protection, our allegiance, our pack's support in whatever challenges lie ahead. The offer hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Alara was only beginning to understand. Accepting would mean stepping fully into the supernatural world, abandoning any pretense of returning to her old human life. It would mean responsibility for not just herself, but for an entire pack of wolves who would look to her for guidance and protection. "What about your current alpha?" she asked. Kale's smile was sharp and proud. "Our father stepped down 3 months ago. I've been leading the pack in his absence, but—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say I'm better suited to being a protector than a politician. The pack needs someone who can navigate the complex relationships between supernatural groups, someone with the authority to speak for them in the councils. Someone like a true alpha," Luna added quietly. Alara looked between them, seeing the hope and trust in their eyes. These weren't people looking for a ruler to command them. They were offering partnership, alliance, the chance to build something better together. The sirens were getting closer now, and she could smell the approach of human officials on the morning wind. Whatever decision she made, it needed to be soon. "I can't give you an answer right now," she said finally. "This is all too new, too overwhelming. I need time to figure out what being a true alpha actually means before I start making commitments that could affect other people's lives." Disappointment flickered across Luna's features, but it was quickly replaced by understanding. "Of course. We'll be at the Moonrise Lodge in the White Mountains if you decide you want to talk. Take all the time you need." Kyle stepped closer, his amber eyes holding hers with intense focus. "For what it's worth, I think you're already exactly what the supernatural world needs. You just haven't realized it yet." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture so gentle and reverent it made her breath catch. The contact sent warmth spiraling through her entire body, and for a moment she could swear she felt something snap into place between them, a connection that went deeper than attraction or even love. "Mate bond," her wolf whispered with satisfaction. Finally. When he pulled back, she saw the same recognition in his eyes. Whatever was building between them, it wasn't just romantic attraction. It was something primal and permanent, written into their very DNA. "I'll find you," she promised softly. "I know you will," he replied with absolute certainty. As the siblings disappeared into the maze of warehouses and shipping containers, Alara stood alone on the loading dock and watched the sun rise over a world that suddenly seemed full of infinite possibilities. Chapter 12. Choosing her path. 3 weeks later, Alara stood in the gardens of her family's Beacon Hill estate, watching her parents pace the manicured lawn like caged animals. The morning sun filtered through ancient oak trees, casting dappled shadows across the perfectly maintained roses her mother had spent decades cultivating. Everything looked exactly as it had when she'd fled her wedding day, but she knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same. "Sweetheart, please." Her mother, adoptive mother, she corrected herself, pleaded for the 12th time. "Just tell us where you've been. The stories in the papers, the speculation about what happened that night." "Margaret, give the girl some space," her father said, though his own worry was evident in the lines around his eyes. "She's been through enough without us interrogating her." Alara almost smiled at that. If they only knew what she'd actually been through, their concerns about society gossip would seem laughably trivial. The wedding that never was had indeed made headlines. Thornfield heiress vanishes on wedding day. Society scandal rocks Boston elite. But the supernatural battle that had reshaped her entire existence hadn't even registered as a footnote. "I'm sorry I worried you," she said, meaning it sincerely. These people had raised her, loved her, protected her for 24 years without ever knowing what she truly was. But I needed time to figure some things out. "About Marcus?" her mother asked hopefully. "Because, dear, these things happen. Pre-wedding jitters are perfectly normal. I'm sure if you just talk to him—" "No." The word came out with enough finality to make both her parents take a step back. "Marcus and I are finished. Permanently." Her father cleared his throat awkwardly. "The financial implications will be handled." Alara interrupted gently. I've made some arrangements. That was putting it mildly. The morning after the warehouse confrontation, she'd discovered that Sebastian's supernatural network had extended far beyond simple pack politics. His business ventures had included several legitimate companies, all of which were now rudderless with their controlling shareholder mysteriously absent. A few carefully placed phone calls, and one demonstration of true alpha authority to a very surprised board of directors, had resulted in a substantial donation to the Thornfield Family Trust. Enough to clear their debts and ensure their social standing remained intact. Her parents didn't need to know that the money had essentially been stolen from a supernatural crime lord. Some truths were better left unspoken. Arrangements? Her mother's voice climbed an octave. Alara, what aren't you telling us? Before she could answer, her enhanced hearing picked up the sound of approaching footsteps on the cobblestone path that led to the garden's entrance. Two sets, moving with the controlled grace that marked supernatural beings trying to pass as human. Her pulse quickened as familiar scents reached her nose. Pine and snow and something indefinably wild. Kale and Luna emerged from behind a hedge of perfectly manicured boxwood, looking distinctly out of place against the formal backdrop of old Boston money. Kale wore dark jeans and a simple black sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders, while Luna had chosen a flowing dress that somehow managed to look both elegant and feral. To Alara's parents, they probably appeared to be perfectly normal young adults. To her newly awakened senses, they practically radiated supernatural power. Friends of yours? Her father asked with the polite wariness he reserved for people who hadn't been properly introduced through the appropriate social channels. Very good friends, Alara confirmed, moving toward them with steps that felt more like floating. 3 weeks apart had felt like 3 years, and seeing Kale again sent warmth spiraling through her chest in ways that had nothing to do with the morning sunshine. Alara, Kale said softly, his amber eyes drinking in the sight of her like a man finding water in the desert. You look human? She suggested with a slight smile. Happy, he corrected. You look happy. And she was, she realized. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the right people, making exactly the right choices. The power that had once felt overwhelming now hummed contentedly beneath her skin, integrated into her sense of self as naturally as breathing. Luna stepped forward with the graceful courtesy that seemed bred into her bones. Mr. and Mrs. Thornfield? I'm Luna Morrison, and this is my brother Kale. We've come to speak with Alara about a business opportunity. Business? Alara's mother looked between them with obvious confusion. What kind of business? The kind that helps people who can't help themselves, Luna replied smoothly. Think of it as specialized consulting. Kale's lips twitched with barely suppressed amusement at Luna's diplomatic phrasing. We've been hoping Alara might consider joining our organization. She has certain talents that would be invaluable in our line of work. What sort of talents? Her father asked suspiciously. Leadership, Kale said simply, his eyes never leaving Alara's face. The ability to see solutions where others see only problems. A natural instinct for protecting those who need protection. It wasn't technically a lie, though it was so far from the complete truth that Alara had to admire Luna's gift for supernatural diplomacy. Her parents, however, seemed reassured by the conventional-sounding explanation. Well, her mother said with visible relief, that does sound like our Alara. She's always been drawn to charity work and helping others. The position would require some travel, Luna added carefully, and irregular hours, but the compensation would be substantial. Another diplomatic understatement. True alphas didn't typically worry about mundane concerns like money, but the supernatural world had its own economy built on favors, alliances, and the kind of power that couldn't be deposited in a bank account. Could we have a moment to discuss this privately? Alara asked her parents. Of course, dear. Her father was already backing toward the house, clearly eager to escape a conversation he didn't fully understand. We'll just go check on lunch preparations. As her parents disappeared through the French doors that led to the morning room, Alara turned to face Kale and Luna with her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 weeks of separation had given her time to think, to process everything that had happened, to come to terms with what she'd become. But it had also shown her something else. That the human world she'd spent her entire life trying to fit into felt hollow and meaningless now that she knew what else was possible. So, she said, trying to keep her voice light despite the magnitude of what she was about to say. Tell me about this business opportunity. Luna's smile was radiant. We're starting a new kind of pack. One that operates across traditional territorial boundaries, focused on protecting supernatural beings who can't protect themselves. Refugees from abusive alphas, newly awakened wolves who don't understand what's happening to them, anyone who needs sanctuary or guidance. A supernatural rescue organization, Kyle added, with you as our alpha, if you'll have us. The offer hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that would reshape not just her life, but the lives of countless others. It was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely right in ways that made her wolf sing with anticipation. What about your father's pack? She asked. Already handled, Luna said with obvious satisfaction. Turns out they're perfectly happy to operate as an independent ally rather than a subsidiary. Modern times call for modern solutions. Alara looked at Kale, seeing the hope and desire and absolute certainty in his amber eyes. The mate bond between them had only grown stronger during their separation, a constant presence at the edge of her consciousness that whispered of belonging and forever and home. There's something else, Kale said quietly. Something we need to discuss before you make your decision. The mate bond, she said, surprising them both with her directness. I can feel it too. Relief flooded his features. I wasn't sure if you understood what it meant. I understand that it's permanent, she replied. I understand that it's beyond rare for a true alpha to find their mate, especially one who can stand as an equal partner rather than a submissive follower. She stepped closer to him, near enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. And I understand that I've never felt more complete than I do when I'm with you. His hand came up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. Then you'll join us? Build this new pack together? Alara looked around the garden one last time. At the roses her mother had tended so carefully, at the house where she'd spent her childhood, at the world of privilege and pretense that had never quite fit her properly. Then she looked back at Kale and Luna, at the promise of purpose and belonging, and a love that transcended anything she'd ever imagined possible. Yes, she said simply. Let's change the world. When Kale kissed her, silver light danced around them both, and Alara knew with absolute certainty that she was finally, truly, home.